I'm Adam Daniels, small engine maintenance manager here at Santee Fire Department. Asked to do a video on the chainsaw and the different parts and pieces of the chainsaw and the different specs on the chainsaw. Today, the video is just going to cover kind of basics on the chainsaw, the basic specs, and the basic parts of the chainsaw. We'll have further videos or further along in this video where we go into depth on the different parts of the chainsaw. So starting out, obviously it's a cutter's edge. 2172, it's the new model that we have, the rescue saw. It's the 2172 RS. So 2172, it's a two-stroke single cylinder, 72 cc's. It's actually 70.7 cc's displacement. It has 6.24 horsepower. Spins with no load at 13,500 RPMs. As far as weight, weighs 21.25 pounds wet, fully loaded with fuel and bar oil. Going over some of the different parts and pieces of the saw itself. Obviously, this is how it's going to be stored. It's going to be stored in the ready to start position. So chokes out. There's no throttle lock, no visual throttle lock on this one. The throttle lock is internal, and we'll go over that in a future video, how the choke has a throttle lock. And the decompression switch is in. This is the ready to start position. This is how it's going to be stored. We're going to have it full of fuel and full of bar oil. So it's going to have the scabbard on it. Scabbard is going to have the ring on the top, and it's going to be clipped on the handle here around there, so you can put it over your shoulder when you're climbing up the ladder. We're going to take the scabbard off. You just slide it forward and pull it back through. The scabbard comes off. Unclip it and get it out of the way when you're ready to use it. We're going to make sure it's also going to be stored with the chain brake in the off position. So going over the bar, this is our bar. It's a 20-inch bar. We have the chain on the bar. Engineer Doe went over kind of the daily checks on it, on the tension of the chain, that kind of stuff. And we have the roller nose bearings is going to be on the bar also. We have the adjuster plate here. The adjuster plate houses the adjuster, which we'll go over the operation of in a later video. Also, we have the air filtration system. Underneath the air filtration system is the carburetor and where the spark plug's housed. Just pop this off. You can see where the carburetor and spark plug are housed on this unit. Chain brake. Chain brake is stored in the ready to use position or the off position. To lock it, put it in the locked position. This doesn't allow the chain to move, but we store it and start it in the off position. We have the deflector plate. Deflector plate keeps debris from when you're cutting from entering the motor. Have the muffler. The muffler is equipped with a spark arrestor. Spark arrestor's up top here. We want to make sure that's clean, and we'll pull that apart and show you that when we get into that section. Also on this side, we have the fuel. We buy pre-mixed fuel. It's here at the station 4. It's on the apparatus. Fuel it with the pre-mixed fuel. We don't mix the fuel ourselves. Make sure you're using the right fuel for the equipment you're using. Obviously, with the two-stroke, we're going to use the fuel mixed with the oil. Bar oil. Make sure the bar oil's topped off. Every time you top off the fuel, top off the bar oil. You can notice it has the bar oil symbol there. While we're over on this side, if you notice the serial number, this is the serial number I use to identify the saw. So if there's an issue with the saw, this 0306000320 is the serial number I identify the saw with. So if you send me an email or something, an issue with the saw, if you can include that serial number, it helps me in case saws get moved to identify the saw. Obviously our throttle, it's got a momentary shut-off switch. You just push it to turn it off and it snaps back so it doesn't stay in the off position. The pull cord. So standard pull cord with a pull handle. Sometimes these things break, so let me know if you have any issues with it and we can repair it. Other than that, you have a vibration dampening system. These springs are vibration dampeners. They isolate the vibration from the motor and your hand, so you're not getting the vibration from the motor when you're operating it at all. We're going to start out with identifying some components here while we have it together. Obviously, we have our scrinch. Our scrinch is going to be used This side is going to be used to remove the plug and install the plug. This side, the smaller side, is going to be used to remove these 2 bolts to remove the cover plate, and the screwdriver side is going to be used to adjust, and we'll go over adjusting procedures when we get there. So first off, we're going to talk about the chain. The chain is obviously a bullet raker chain. These bullet looking things are called rakers. What a raker does, a raker kind of makes way for the cutting edge. This is a carbide tip cutting edge. It's brazed on. The raker clears room for the cutting edge. It has a gullet in between the raker and the cutting edge. And this is a cutter's edge design to allow us to cut different materials and cut through different materials and to blow through different kinds of debris, such as nails, screws, that kind of stuff. And it increases the longevity of the chain. This chain itself is, the bar is a 20-inch bar, so the chain is for a 20-inch bar. And we'll go over the different parts and pieces of the chain when we get it off and you can see it better. So first off, we're gonna take this the chain off and the bar off to get access to it, to clean it. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen these 2 nuts. We have 2 nuts here. We use our scrunch. Take the small end, loosen both nuts, take it off. We're gonna hold the bar, support it with our right hand, and loosen the tensioner here, the adjuster. So we're going to back that off. So obviously we release the tension on the chain. Now we can, with supporting the bar and taking the weight off the nuts, we can remove both nuts and place them in a secure area where we're not going to lose them, like this rag here, so we know exactly where they're at. So we're going to place those out right there. We're going to pull this cover off, place it to the side, and the bar and chain come off all together. Common misconception, same misconception that I had, is the pitch. The pitch is the measurement between any 3 rivets, 1, 2, 3, divided by 2. So any 3 consecutive rivets divided by 2 equals the pitch of the chain, which doesn't really matter in the long run how far apart the rivets are, but you need to know the pitch of the chain so it corresponds with the size of your drive sprocket. So this, if you see this is 404 on the drive sprocket, then you want to make sure your chain is also 404 to fit in between the grooves of the drive socket, because if you get the wrong size pitch, it's not going to correspond with your drive socket and it's not going to work. So that's why it's important to us what the pitch of the chain is. The gauge is the thickness of the drive sprocket right here. So this drive sprocket fits inside this bar, sits inside the groove of the bar, so you want the right gauge or the right thickness to fit inside your bar. If you think of gauge like a 18 gauge IV catheter, that's the thickness of the catheter. That's kind of how I remember the difference between pitch and gauge. So obviously our bar is going to have the same gauge as the chain. It's a 20-inch bar. It has 11 tooth ring roller on the tip, roller tip. There are some grease points here, one there, and one on this side, and that's how you grease the bearings in the tip with the grease provided by cutter's edge. Moving on to the drive sprocket itself. So this is a drive sprocket. It's an 8-by drive. So there's 8 grooves in here that the chain sits in. It doesn't sit in all 8 grooves at one time, but there's 8 grooves that the chain sits in all the way around this sprocket. So you want to make sure you have the right sprocket, and it creates more surface area contact the more grooves it has. That's why the 8-by is important. Also, while we're in here and we can see it, this is the oil adjustment right here. So this is how you adjust the bar oil. So when you run the saw, you want to run the saw and kind of point it at the ground to make sure you're getting enough bar oil, or to make sure bar oil is hitting the ground. And if it is not, then you can adjust the screw and it tells you to the left is more oil, to the right is less oil. All right, so while we have the chain and the bar off and that cover plate off, we're going to talk about how the clutch works on this particular saw. So you've heard it said 3-shoe centrifugal clutch. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this E-clip off. Make sure we don't lose it. Make sure it doesn't go flying when we pop it off. We're going to put it over on our towel. Make sure we keep it. We're going to take this washer off. If you can see, it's concave on the top, so we want to make sure we put it back on in that orientation. Take the sprocket off. Again, the sprocket has the writing on the top. We want to put it back in that orientation. And then we can take the drum off. So inside this drum, inside the drum is your 3-shoe centrifugal clutch. So here's each shoe. 1, 2, 3. 3 shoes. The way that the centrifugal clutch works, there's spring pressure. These are springs. These springs are holding the shoes back off this drum right now as it sits. With centrifugal force, when this spins, the centrifugal force overcomes the spring pressure, and the clutch shoes rub against the outside of this drum, causing it. Obviously, the drum is attached directly to that sprocket, and that's what causes your chain to spin. So that's why at idle, it doesn't overcome the spring pressure, and it's not making contact with your drum. When you rev the engine, more centrifugal force throws the shoes out, overcomes your spring pressure, causes your drum to spin, and that's how your chain is driven. With your brake, this band right here on the outside is your brake. So if you see, if I tighten it down without that drum on there, you can see that brake snap back. So when we put the drum on, you put the drum on, put it right there, you snap that band back, and it clamps down against the drum. It doesn't allow the drum to spin. That's why you don't want to like rev your engine while your brake is on, because it can cause those shoes to premature wear on those shoes because of the friction. So that's what stops it. That in turn stops the sprocket and stops the chain from spinning. That brake is inertia activated. So if it kicks back, it'll go on, and it goes on in less than 0.2 of a second. So I'll snap on and stop that chain in less than 0.2 of a second. And that's how the 3-shoe centrifugal clutch works. All right. So now we're going to go over reassembly of the bar, the chain, and the cover plate, and how to tension the chain. So first thing you want to do is you want to make sure your cover's on. You want to make sure it's in the right orientation, all your grooves lined up. It's sitting the right way, and it's not sticking out. Right here is the groove where the bar oil comes out and oils the chain. So when you take your bar off, you're going to want to remember which way you took it off, and every time you reinstall it, you're going to want to flip the bar. This just gives nice even wear on both sides of the bar. So just keep track of the way you took it off. A lot of them have writing on them. This one's worn out. But keep track of the way you took it off. So it has numbers on one side, doesn't have numbers on the other. So we'll put it back on the opposite way in which we took it off. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put our chain back on our bar. Make sure it's sitting down in the grooves. And then we're going to, once we get this on, kind of hold it on there with our hand. Make sure to take the slack out. We're going to feed it underneath the wraparound handle. Make sure it sits down in the grooves of the sprocket. Sits down in the grooves of the sprocket, and ensure your chain is going in the right direction. I know it sounds kind of silly, but make sure your bullet tips are leading your carbide cutters on the top. So make sure your chain's rotating in the right direction. While holding it, reinstall your cover plate. And at that point, kind of freeze up at hand, grab your nuts, and reinstall the nuts on the saw. Get them kind of finger tight where you can still adjust them. Don't crank them down yet. Get them finger tight. And use your adjuster here and adjust the saw. If you see, when you spin this, it's a worm gear that pushes this out. This has a point on it that matches up with a hole in the bar. So when you put this back on, make sure that seats down in the hole. If it doesn't, you might have to back it off a little bit to get it to seat down in there. Once it seats down in there, this pin will push the bar out, causing the chain to have tension on it. So tighten it up, kind of supporting your bar at the same time, and then periodically check the tension in your chain. You want your chain to have enough tension just to snap back. It needs to be a little bit tighter, so we'll go ahead and tighten it down a little bit, making sure we don't strip out that screw. Usually use a rag so you're not pulling on the chain itself. Pull it out, snap it back. I need to go a little bit tighter. That should be good. Before I go any further, I want to just make sure it's all seated down in there. Make sure it's running around the track fine. It didn't come off my sprocket when I tightened it down. And now I can tighten down these nuts. Supporting my bar, I'm going to tighten these down. Make sure they're nice and tight, you don't want them to be loose. And then again, ensuring that my chain breaks off. I again pull, make sure I have the correct tension on it. Make sure it snaps back. And make sure it's still in the groove. And again, I double check my orientation of my rakers, that they are leading my carbide cutting tips on the top of the bar. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the air filtration system, the carburetor, the choke, pretty much the whole top half of this this cover here. We'll also get to the spark plug since we're underneath there. First thing we're going to talk about is the air filtration system. It's a K&N filter. We'll go over the cleaning procedures in another video. But just to give you kind of an overview of the filtration system, they call it a 4-stage filtration system. It's a dry filter on top of a wet oiled filter. So you want to make sure that's big. That's very important that the dry goes on top of the wet. This has an oil tack barrier. This is the one-way oil, and like I said, I'll show you how to oil it in another video. But we want to keep this one dry. This takes away some of the big debris. If we oil this, all the dirt and debris is going to stick to the outside, and it's going to really limit our airflow. So we want to make sure we keep this one dry. Kind of protects the oil and doesn't let the dirt and debris stick to the oil. The filter in this orientation, if you see, we take it off. It's got a hose clamp here. Take the hose clamp off. If you see the exhaust port on the filter that lines up with the intake on the machine is kind of offset in the filter itself. So we want to make sure that when we put it on, when we get it back on, it's kind of towards the back of the machine. That way it doesn't cramp the front of the machine. So we take it off, and this is our dry filter and our oil tack barrier on that. To get this cover off, we pull the scrunch out. We can put the screwdriver, the flat end in here. Just pop these two clips off and lift this up and out of the way. And this gives us access to the carburetor, the spark plug, everything. So we'll go over the choke system right now since we're here. This is the choke lever, obviously. The choke butterfly is down in here, if you can see it. Down in this area, if you watch, the choke is in the off position, allowing maximum airflow past the butterfly. If we pull it in the on position, it limits the airflow, creating a fuel-rich environment in the carburetor, allowing for easier cold starting. That's why we pull it on into the on position, which is closed on the butterfly, richens up our fuel mixture, gets that initial pop, then we can push it back in and start the machine. Also, if you notice, like I said before, this doesn't have an external throttle lock. It does have an internal throttle lock. So if you look down in here, there's a black clip right here that when you pull this choke, see that black clip coming up, makes contact with this arm, and it pushes that arm up out of the way. That arm is connected over here to the throttle, and that is actually an internal throttle lock on this machine. So when we get that initial pop, we push our choke back in. If you watch this arm, it doesn't move. See that black clip is still engaged with that arm. So that throttle is still locked in a higher idle position. Once we get it started with the choke in the off position, then we give our initial pull of the trigger or the throttle, then this black clip will fall out of the way. If you watch, it kind of happens a little bit quick, but it falls out of the way. See it fall out of the way? Now that returns all the way down to the low position, and it goes into an idle. So once you do that initial pull of the throttle, then that's what disengages that throttle lock on this machine. Also, if you're doing any work with this cover off of the machine, you can see the carburetor is wide open, so they recommend that you do pull the choke on to keep any debris from falling down all the way down in the carburetor. If it does fall down, it gets stopped by that choke. Moving on to here, this is the spark plug, obviously. It's going to be a CJ7Y, or NGK has a different number. Take it off with a scrunch, pull it out. Pull it out. This is your gap right here. So when they talk about 0.02 gap, they're measuring right here, the gap between the electrode and the top of the plug right there. So this is where we want to measure our gap. It's right inside here. You use a spark plug gap tool, make sure it's 0.02 on the gap. They're set from the factory when you get them. These certain plugs are set to 0.02. So unless they get smashed or anything, you're going to have the correct gap on it. And make sure you don't smash it when you put it in. This is a direct intake into the top of the cylinder, so you want to be extra careful not to make sure no debris gets down in there that can scratch or harm the cylinder. So make sure it's clean when you do it. Take your plug out, inspect it. If it's wet, if it's flooded, the plug might be wet. Do some pulls with the plugs out, and we'll show you how to clear a flooded saw in a later video with our startup procedures, and then we can reinstall our plug. Just go ahead and put it back in finger tight. And then snug it down with your scrunch. You're not cranking on it. These things can break and will break inside or break the threads inside. So make sure it's snug down with your scrunch, nice and snug. You want to make sure it doesn't come out when with the vibration, and then reinstall your spark plug wire.